Hello. So this is the unboxing and reboxing of Dark Meadow Brain Globule 1. It's a gift to someone on YouTube, and this will represent the future of silicon components. And Dart Edge technology, which is the positioning through cognition of attributes, components, and algorithms in the form of minerals, elements, compounds, and bases. I just got this around the corner at a shop, and I need to etch it before I send this gift along its way to the receiver. So this is a labradorite, nice, and one side's polished, which is not exactly what I wanted, but it's good in this case because the rest is untumbled. I love working with raw stuff when doing the educational side to Dark Meadow. But what's nice about this, it's crystalline, and it's not a full-blown element. It's a compound. So, and aside from being an ore and others of such, it forms as a crystalline, which if you've been following the news lately, Russia recently did a study on why a swing in a park would be able to swing itself without any outside forces. And I wrote back and posted an algorithm on why crystallines work in such a way they do. They retain a motor function to the formation of the atoms themselves. It's an intermittent state in formation of minerals. It's in between. It's a captured balance of minerals, and we call them crystallines. So they still have balanced dynamics that form the electrons balanced around its nucleus, embedded and frozen forever. So you can access those and make use of them. So they're an enhancement when it comes to designing chemistry. You can mix, like sulfur and maybe copper together and have a type of reaction depending on how you do it, whether it's with temperature or weight, pressure and whatnot. But if you throw a crystalline of your choice into the situation, you have these little engines that are frozen forever, ready to add a unique process in your chemistry. And they especially help when you want to color a mineral. Like add color to steel. So there we use magnesium, environmentally safe things when it comes to medicine and other aspects of agriculture, farming, and so forth. So I'm going to use this as an overall representation of Dark Meadow LLC Brain Globule 1. As you can see from my recent updates to across my company and the social networks and the websites, I'm doing a name change from Neptune Ideas, the head company, to Dark Meadow. That'll be the main company, just as with any other aerospace company and rockets and transportation vehicles. But what Dark Meadow will be in the end is nothing more than a computer. From the lab that's used to make the technology, to the technology itself, to the programs used to operate the technology. And in essence, when you're involving aerospace, it's all about navigation. No matter what you do to make navigation, the tools, the objects, the materials, the software you put on it, in the end, it's navigation. So you throw that on a screen, in the end, those same companies that are operating their satellites and transport vehicles, they're nothing more than a computer. And especially, you'll see that more so as solar science gets more in depth with the higher the percentage we can bring in the use of a solar cell. I think we're up around 17 to the low 20s of percentage of retaining energy out of solar cells use. Well, it was very low, below 10, I think, before, just maybe a couple years ago, if that. And so they're becoming very efficient. Not only that, we're doing it at the commercial consumer level. Those progresses were so expensive that only NASA would buy those things. And this ain't even progress in the industrial federal sense. This is progress at the consumer level. These universities and various scientists are doing to progress solar cell technology. So this, as a gift, I will represent nothing more than a telecommunications device, which is where the GPUs are headed. One device for all your peripherals, even from the CPU to the bionic architecture chips and so forth. So what I want to do here is etch a few things that are natural to life, such as the basic primitives. I'm going to make a few shapes on here. I don't have too much with me except for a knitting needle to scratch the surface of this labradorite, excuse me. Put a couple of triangles with a solid triangle hatch. If I was near a hardware store with a little extra cash, I might go buy a file, which would be more suitable. But since one side is untumbled, I can etch that a little easier. See here. There. So, designing transistors in a CPU is a unique process in using a light wavelength to burn an image. Kind of like the old days in photography or printing newspapers. You would burn onto a steel plate with light and do a contrast difference for your plate. That would be used in a press to run the paper through and stamp the paper based off the reaction of that plate that was treated with chemicals. So when light touched it, it would create a print off the plate using temperature variations. So transistors are the same, but every component we do now, we're doing the same thing with even the first components that we used as a CPU, which would process 0s and 1 through your orders of operation. And we're just arranging more of those to fit more in a smaller space. But what few people do know how to do, and it's not just particularly that one person's experience, but just not knowing what's really out there growing up and coming across the right people that do know certain things to be taught those things. And you can actually process a 0 or 1 in a single pulse, which is how 0s and 1s work when you're exposing wall power to your silicon chip. But you can actually you can take a piece of your order of operations, excuse me, we got some noise in the background. So what if you wanted to do the square root of a plus b to the exponent of 4, and then divide that by, say, a times b, or you could say a times a divided by a times a in the first equation, or whereas when I mentioned before, b could actually represent another transistor component, but you can actually make a mineral that's adjusted just to that geometry, so when a pulse hits it, it processes the whole thing in one pulse, versus having to use millions of transistors to do such. And it's just a matter of people knowing how to do those things. They're rare things. You actually have to use push and pull, which is where grids and charting comes in, X, Y, Z, and all that. You can actually do that just right, so your electron will give you that very response to all that different math. And the fact is, and why it even works is because not many people know or get taught that geometry comes before photosynthesis. So your geometry, which is your order of operations themselves, the little symbols in between the numbers, minus, plus, actually run parallel, very congruent in math to the math and the numbers themselves. So you can put either one. Your geometry would be the minerals, and you can set that mineral to read as a solid state on a pulse, just the way the current single mineral is set to read a 0 or a 1 in a pulse, or more of those to read multiple pulses of the same unit. So you could have one exponent in your root as a pulse, and how they would actually even work together from the same wall power is because they're congruent to each other. Those two minerals are congruent to each other. But again, crystal lines. You can read more up at reachforcreation.com, and dartmeadow.com is up right now. So anyhow, to those of you out there in the AI world, deep learning, machine learning, NLP, aerospace, gamers, astronomers, stay tuned to global news and news at Reach for Creation Labs. Thank you. Let's box this back up before we head off here today. I've recently posted a blurb on and updated some graphics on reachforcreation.com about the proton. The proton is probably the most fascinating part to an atom, at its involvement with all the minerals and the processes of formation, especially with crystallines. The proton really has the first say in why things are and why they are. And protons are not an opposite of a negative. The word proton is actual contextual language used to position the same negatives or a negative in a different way that is congruent, in most cases, to most sciences today, to your general education systems and all. So it's just a contextual language. Your proton is actually a cognation position as opposed to the nucleus. So if a collision happens before it forms an atom, your mass, which is the electron, those dynamics themselves, the motion of particles moving around in air or a vacuum, get balanced so that they sometimes collide enough together with enough pressure that just those dynamics become frozen in a piece of matter, say a second rock or the same rock. And those positions, the nucleus is neutral, so therefore it's like a base to hold that dynamic. So it's a neutral dynamic. And then your active dynamic is the spring, the liveliness of that motion that is balanced and frozen in time and embedded. And this can happen very fast or over a long course of time, especially in your galaxies. So it gets busted again, and those dynamics get released. But at this point, they've been preserved, and that blueprint of neutron and protons go with that mass again of motion, and this time a different type of temperature is hitting that collision area, and so the electron gets to go in orbit around that blueprint, and you have a new atom. That's what that is. So your electron is the mass provided out of collision, different proportionals being thrown together and balanced for a period of time, or just of what it is, whether it's a root natural, like numbers and math, space is natural, many collisions happen around the world, we always know fire to be one thing, just the same with numbers and language and all that stuff. So you have uniques like that collision also happens within, among, from, or before. And much to read up on for those of you with an interest in chemistry and astronomy. Thanks again for tuning in, and stay tuned.